When calm waters hide monsters, danger is only inches away. From peaceful rivers to safari boats, these stories show how crocodiles strike without warning, turning quiet moments into chaos. Guides, tourists, and experts alike faced jaws of unimaginable power and speed. Each splash, scream, and struggle proved that beneath still water lies silent death. These predators don't chase, they wait, watching for one careless move. Watch till the end to see how quickly calm turns to terror when the river strikes back. On September 8, 2017, Emily Parker and her husband, Daniel, arrived at a quiet stretch of river deep in the heart of southern Africa. They had been traveling for days, exploring remote landscapes far from towns or villages. Emily was a wildlife photographer who loved the stillness of untouched nature. Daniel, a teacher and amateur birdwatcher, shared her passion for adventure. The two often camped near rivers, setting up their small tent close to the water's edge, where Emily could take pictures of morning light reflecting off the surface. That afternoon, the air was warm and still, the kind of silence that made the world feel untouched. The only sounds were the calls of distant herons and the soft rustle of wind through tall grass. As the sun began to dip, Emily walked down toward the river to rinse her hands after cooking. The water looked calm, clear enough to see the smooth stones below. She stepped slowly into the shallows, the cool current swirling around her ankles. Daniel stood nearby, watching from the bank, relaxed and unaware of the danger hiding beneath the surface. The river's edge seemed peaceful, but in the shadows of deeper water, an enormous Nile crocodile rested, half buried in mud, its dark scales blending perfectly with the murky riverbed. For a long moment, nothing moved. The crocodile's eyes stayed fixed on the faint ripples that spread across the water. When Emily waded a little farther, the faint vibration reached the predator's senses. Its massive tail flexed, sending a quiet wave through the current. Then, with terrifying speed, it launched upward. The calm river exploded in a violent burst of spray as jaws clamped around Emily's lower leg. She was yanked off balance instantly, the sound of rushing water filling the air. Daniel froze for a split second, then rushed forward, grabbing at her arm as the current churned around them. Emily kicked frantically, trying to pull free, but the crocodile's strength was impossible to fight. The animal began its steady drag backward, moving toward deeper water with frightening precision. The more she struggled, the stronger its pull became. Daniel leaned dangerously close, his feet sinking into the soft mud as he fought to keep his grip. The water around them turned brown with sand and debris as the predator's massive tail struck the surface, sending waves crashing against the bank. Emily's hand slipped in his grasp. The crocodile's movements became slower but more deliberate, its power absolute. In one final surge, it pulled her beneath the surface. The ripples spread outward in silence, the calm returning as quickly as it had vanished. Daniel fell to his knees on the muddy edge, staring at the still water where she had stood moments before. The only trace left was a faint swirl of bubbles and the echo of rushing current fading into quiet once again. The river grew silent again, the surface smooth except for faint ripples that slowly faded away. Daniel stayed frozen on the muddy edge, his hands shaking, his mind unable to understand what had just happened. Only moments earlier, the afternoon had been peaceful and calm. But now the still water hid a terrible truth beneath it. He searched the surface desperately, his eyes darting from one side of the river to the other, hoping to see some sign of movement. The quietness felt unbearable, broken only by the distant cries of birds overhead and the soft hum of insects in the grass. Seconds stretched into long, endless minutes. Then a dark shape surfaced several meters away. For a brief moment, Daniel saw a swirl of water and the outline of the massive reptile turning in slow, powerful rolls. The sight was enough to send a wave of dread through him. He stumbled backward from the edge, fear mixing with disbelief. The Nile crocodile was now completely hidden again, its prey lost beneath the murk. He ran up the bank toward the camp, his feet slipping on the wet ground. Every sound around him seemed louder. The wind in the trees, the snapping of branches underfoot. He grabbed a flashlight and a long branch, returning to the edge. But the river looked calm and endless once more. No bubbles, no splashes. Nothing but an eerie reflection of the darkening sky. The light from the setting sun turned the water orange and red, colors that only deepened his sense of loss. Night fell quickly in the wilderness. The forest around him was filled with the sounds of frogs and distant calls of nocturnal animals. Daniel sat by the fire he had built, the flames flickering weakly against the encroaching dark. His clothes were soaked and heavy, his eyes fixed on the river. The weight of silence pressed on him, every minute feeling like an hour. He knew the creature would not return. It had vanished with the same stealth it had attacked. By morning, help arrived from a nearby village after Daniel's faint signal flares were spotted. Search teams scanned the riverbanks and shallow pools with long poles, their boats drifting quietly through the muddy channels. The smell of damp earth and riverweed filled the air. For hours, they searched every corner, finding only small, torn pieces of fabric caught in reeds near the water's bend. The discovery confirmed what Daniel already feared. The authorities later recorded the event as a fatal crocodile attack, one of several in the region that year. Local guides explained that Nile crocodiles often stay perfectly still beneath shallow water, invisible to anyone nearby. Even a single step too far from the edge can bring a sudden, deadly strike. Daniel never returned to that river again. The quiet stretch that once brought him peace became a place of haunting memory. The stillness of that morning, the moment of calm before the attack, and the silence afterward stayed with him forever. A reminder of how swiftly nature can turn from beauty to tragedy without warning. On September 22, 2024, the morning sun broke gently over the Chobe River in Botswana. The surface of the water shimmered like glass, broken only by the lazy ripples of hippos and the faint splash of birds landing near the reeds. A small motorboat drifted slowly downstream, carrying a group of safari tourists eager to capture the beauty of the wild. At the helm stood Ethan Collins, a seasoned guide with years of experience navigating the region's winding waterways. Known for his calm demeanor and deep respect for nature, he had led countless tours without incident. Among the passengers was a man named Thomas Reed, an enthusiastic traveler from England who had dreamed of exploring Africa's wild heart since childhood. His camera never left his hands as he clicked away at elephants wading along the banks and buffalo grazing in the distance. The air was warm and still, filled with the hum of insects and the distant calls of birds. It felt peaceful, almost too calm. Ethan maneuvered the boat close to the shoreline where a family of hippos rested half submerged in the shallows. He slowed the engine, allowing the group to take photos. The tourists leaned over the edge for a closer look, laughing softly as the animals yawned wide. Thomas crouched lower, angling his camera toward the glowing reflection of the riverbank. The muddy water beneath the boat appeared quiet and undisturbed, concealing everything that moved beneath its surface. What none of them saw was the silent shadow waiting just meters away. Concealed beneath the reeds, a massive saltwater crocodile lay still, its scaly body blending perfectly with the muddy water. It had been watching the boat drift closer, its ancient eyes fixed on the movements above. Every ripple and splash only sharpened its focus. Then, in an instant, the peace was shattered. The crocodile lunged from the murky water with terrifying speed, its powerful jaws snapping around Thomas's leg before anyone could react. The force of the strike slammed his body against the side of the boat, sending cameras and bags tumbling across the deck. Screams filled the air as the water exploded in foam and blood. The predator's massive tail thrashed, rocking the small vessel from side to side as passengers clung to the rails for balance. Ethan grabbed a long wooden pole and swung it hard against the crocodile's head. The animal twisted, dragging Thomas halfway over the edge. His hand scraped against the metal railing as he struggled to hold on, but the predator's strength was overwhelming. Tourists beat the water with whatever they could find, camera bags, paddles, even plastic bottles, trying to distract it. The sound of chaos echoed across the river as the crocodile pulled harder, shaking its prey in a violent struggle that churned the water into a muddy storm. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the predator released its grip and disappeared beneath the surface, leaving behind a red swirl and silence heavy enough to freeze every heart on board. Panic gripped the small boat as everyone stared at the water, waiting for another strike. The silence after the chaos felt unreal. The surface of the Chobe River was calm again, but the brown ripples carried traces of blood that spread slowly outward. Ethan's breath came in quick bursts as he steadied the vessel, forcing it away from the shoreline with a trembling hand. Thomas lay on the deck, his leg torn and bleeding heavily, his clothes soaked. A passenger pressed a shirt against the wound while others sat frozen, unable to look away from the river that had just exploded in violence. The air was thick with fear. Ethan scanned the muddy surface, afraid the predator might return. Every swirl or ripple looked like the start of another attack. He kept the boat moving toward the middle of the channel, the engine humming unevenly as the group tried to regain control. Cameras, bags, and broken gear floated near the bank, reminders of how fast everything had changed. When the vessel reached deeper water, Ethan checked Thomas again. His skin was pale, and blood soaked through the fabric used to cover the bite. The marks were deep, clean punctures that left no doubt about the creature's power. Tourists huddled around him, whispering prayers as one of them poured bottled water to clean the wound. The smell of iron filled the air, mixing with the earthy scent of the river. Minutes stretched endlessly before they spotted another safari boat in the distance. Ethan waved frantically, signaling for help. The other guide steered over, eyes wide when he saw the injured passenger. They transferred Thomas onto the larger boat, which carried a first aid kit and a radio. The sound of the call for medical evacuation broke the heavy stillness. By the time the boats reached the dock, emergency workers were waiting. They lifted Thomas onto a stretcher and rushed him to a nearby clinic. The rest of the tourists stepped onto the shore in silence, still trembling. The calm riverbank that had once looked peaceful now felt dangerous, its surface hiding unseen threats below. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly across Botswana and beyond. Wildlife experts examined the scene, confirming that the attacker was a large saltwater crocodile likely drawn by the movement and splashing near the edge of the boat. Local authorities issued warnings for guides to keep vessels farther from the riverbank, especially during the dry season when crocodiles linger close to the surface. Thomas survived after surgery but carried deep scars on his leg, both physical and emotional. Ethan returned to work weeks later, though every sound from the river made him tense. The incident became a lesson retold to every new group of tourists, that beneath the quiet waters of Africa's wild rivers, ancient predators still waited, unseen but never far away. On September 12, 2016, Lucas Bennett began his afternoon safari walk along the peaceful banks of the Zambezi River. He had worked as a guide for more than 15 years, known for his calm nature and sharp instincts. Guests trusted him completely, for he seemed to understand every movement of the wild, how the hippos surfaced when elephants crossed, and where crocodiles usually rested. The golden sun hung low in the sky that day, bathing the grasslands in warm light as Lucas led a small group of tourists along a narrow dirt path lined with reeds and scattered trees. The air was still, heavy with heat and the soft hum of insects. Birds skimmed the surface of the slow-moving river, their wings flashing white against the glow of dusk. Lucas spoke softly as he pointed toward the far bank, where a pod of hippos floated like dark stones in the shallows. His group followed quietly, cameras ready, their steps crunching against the dry soil. The scene seemed peaceful, too peaceful for what lay hidden just meters away beneath the cloudy surface. A massive Nile crocodile, thick as a log and longer than a canoe, waited motionless near a fallen tree. Its dark eyes watched from beneath the water, nostrils barely visible above the surface. The predator's patience was ancient, its senses tuned to vibration and shadow. Every ripple, every movement on the shore told it where to strike. As Lucas stepped closer to the edge, intending to point toward the hippos, the crocodile sensed opportunity. The water erupted without warning. A violent splash broke the silence as the crocodile surged upward, jaws wide, striking with shocking force. Its teeth sank into Lucas's lower leg, crushing bone in an instant. The impact threw him off balance and he fell backward toward the bank, screaming in pain. The group froze, terror flooding their faces as water and mud flew into the air. Lucas tried to fight, kicking with his free leg, grabbing at exposed roots for leverage. The predator thrashed, pulling with immense strength to drag him toward deeper water. An assistant rushed forward, swinging a sturdy branch at the crocodile's head, but the blow barely registered. The beast twisted, performing its deadly role, churning the river into froth. The sound of water and cries filled the air as tourists stumbled back, helpless and horrified. Within seconds, the guide's body was yanked below the surface, vanishing into the swirling current. Bubbles rose, then silence. Only ripples remained where Lucas had stood moments before. The tourists stood frozen, staring at the dark water, the fading light reflecting off its rippling surface. The calm of the Zambezi had returned, but now it carried the weight of fear. For those who witnessed it, the river was no longer just part of the landscape. It was alive, waiting, and merciless. A place where even the most skilled could vanish in an instant beneath the jaws of one of Africa's oldest predators. For a long moment after Lucas vanished, no one moved. The group stood frozen at the river's edge, staring into the dark water that had swallowed him. The air hung heavy with shock and disbelief. The stillness of the Zambezi returned, broken only by the soft ripples spreading across the surface and the distant calls of birds. The assistant dropped the branch he had used, his hands shaking as he stepped back from the water. Fear pressed down on everyone like a weight, and the warm glow of the evening sun now seemed cruel and distant. The tourists began to retreat slowly, their breaths shallow, eyes wide with horror. Each step away from the river felt uncertain, the silence behind them more terrifying than any sound. The once beautiful setting had changed completely, the calm river now a place of dread. The group climbed back up the narrow path toward higher ground, their minds struggling to understand what had just happened. At the top, they stopped and looked down one last time at the dark shape of the river winding below, still and endless. Help arrived soon after, alerted by the assistant who ran for the nearby camp. Local rangers and rescuers gathered with boats, scanning the water with poles and flashlights. The night grew darker, and the glow of lanterns reflected off the moving current as they searched every corner near the fallen tree. Hours passed, but no trace of Lucas appeared. The crocodile had vanished into the depths, leaving only broken reeds and disturbed mud behind. The rescue team finally returned to shore, quiet and solemn. Everyone knew the truth, even before it was spoken aloud. In the days that followed, word of the tragedy spread quickly through the region. Other guides spoke of Lucas with respect and sadness, remembering his calm voice and steady presence. He had trained many of them, teaching the importance of safety and awareness near dangerous water. Now his loss served as a harsh reminder of what could happen even to the most careful and skilled. His family arrived soon after, standing by the river in silence, watching the gentle waves that hid what had taken him. Tour operators suspended walking tours along that section of the Zambezi for several weeks. Rangers reinforced rules and marked new safety zones along the banks. The attack drew attention from across the country, reminding everyone that the Nile crocodile, despite its quiet nature, remained one of Africa's most efficient hunters. Many who had once found beauty in the river now felt unease at its edge. The calm reflection of the sunset no longer brought comfort, but instead recalled the danger that had lurked beneath it. As the season changed and the rains returned, the river swelled again, carrying driftwood and memories downstream. The site of the attack slowly disappeared under the rising water, as if the river itself was reclaiming it. But those who had been there never forgot. To them, the Zambezi would always carry Lucas Bennett's final lesson, that in the wild, peace and peril can exist in the same breath. On August 17, 2025, the golden evening light spread over the Rufiji River in southern Tanzania, painting the wide surface in shades of orange and gold. Wildlife photographer Marcus Reynolds crouched at the muddy edge of the water, camera balanced in his steady hands. For more than 10 years, he had traveled across continents to capture rare moments of nature, predators in motion, birds in flight, and animals in their most natural behavior. The river was quiet that day, the air warm and still, the only sounds coming from insects and the distant grunts of hippos resting in the shallows. Marcus had come to the Rufiji to document the balance between water and wildlife during the dry season. With his experience and patience, he had learned how to wait silently for hours. His goal that afternoon was simple: to capture the silhouettes of hippos against the setting sun. Around him, a small group of tourists watched quietly, staying back as Marcus inched closer to the water's edge for the perfect frame. The moment seemed peaceful, even serene, but beneath the surface, something ancient and deadly waited. Unseen in the murky current, a massive saltwater crocodile rested motionless. Its body blended perfectly with the muddy water, eyes fixed on the moving figure above. The crocodile had likely been watching for some time, drawn by the ripples near the edge and the faint vibration of movement on the bank. As Marcus leaned forward to adjust his focus, his boot sank slightly into the soft earth, sending tiny waves across the surface. To a predator, those ripples signaled opportunity. In a blur of motion, the calm broke. The crocodile erupted from the river with a violent surge, jaws wide and powerful. Water exploded upward as its teeth clamped onto Marcus's ankle, the force knocking him backward into the shallows. A flash of panic surged through him as pain seared his leg. The tourists screamed, their voices echoing across the open river. Marcus kicked wildly, fighting the crushing pressure of the bite, Mud and water churned as the crocodile dragged him closer to the deeper section, its massive tail slicing the water like a whip. His hands grasped at the slick ground, nails digging into wet soil as his camera slipped from his grasp and disappeared into the current. The air filled with splashes and shouts as the group on the bank waved sticks and splashed to distract the predator. For seconds that felt endless, the struggle continued. Man against the ancient strength of one of nature's deadliest hunters. Then, as suddenly as it had struck, the crocodile released. The pressure vanished and Marcus gasped, scrambling through the mud toward land. His leg bled heavily, the torn fabric of his pants clinging to his skin. Behind him, the dark shape sank beneath the surface again, the ripples spreading outward before fading into stillness. The river returned to silence, leaving only Marcus's ragged breathing and the soft rush of water over stone as the sun dipped below the horizon. Marcus collapsed on the muddy ground, his body trembling from shock. The air around him felt thick and heavy, carrying the smell of wet soil and blood. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, echoing louder than the sounds of the river itself. The world seemed distant and muffled, yet every movement near the water caught his attention. He kept his eyes fixed on the surface, half expecting the shadow to rise again. For long moments, no one moved. The only motion came from the slow drift of bubbles and the fading ripples where the crocodile had vanished. The tourists finally rushed to his side, pulling him farther up the slope away from the edge. His leg was covered in deep gashes, the skin torn where the massive jaws had clamped down. Mud mixed with the blood, turning dark against his torn clothing. One of the guides grabbed a first aid kit from the nearby jeep and pressed a cloth firmly around the wounds to slow the bleeding. Marcus winced and gritted his teeth as pressure was applied, his body shivering from the mix of pain and adrenaline. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky into a deep crimson. The once calm river now looked sinister, its reflection broken and dark. Every sound from the water sent a wave of unease through the group. Somewhere downstream, a splash echoed, reminding everyone that the predator was still close. The guides kept watch, standing between Marcus and the riverbank, alert for any movement beneath the surface. After several tense minutes, they lifted Marcus carefully onto a stretcher and began carrying him toward the waiting vehicle. The path was uneven, lined with reeds and stones, but they moved quickly, driven by fear that the crocodile might return. As the vehicle started toward the nearest medical post, Marcus looked back at the fading outline of the river. What had been a peaceful scene only an hour earlier now seemed like a place of hidden danger. Quiet yet full of unseen life waiting below. At the clinic, doctors worked quickly to clean and stitch the wounds. The bite had missed major arteries, but the muscle damage was severe. The risk of infection was high due to the bacteria carried in crocodile mouths. After hours of treatment, Marcus was stable but weak, his leg wrapped in layers of bandages. News of the attack spread fast through the area, reaching nearby lodges and photographers' groups. Many were stunned that such an experienced professional had come so close to losing his life while doing something routine. Days later, as he recovered in a small hospital room, Marcus replayed the moment in his mind over and over. The still water, the sudden burst of motion, the raw power of nature unleashed in seconds. His camera and equipment were lost, but he had survived what few ever did. The river remained calm again, but it carried an unspoken warning. Every ripple, every shadow beneath the surface was now a reminder of how quickly beauty could turn to danger in the wild. In May 2021, 34-year-old Sarah Moyle guided her canoe quietly along the smooth waters of the Zambezi River near Victoria Falls. A soft wind brushed against the reeds, and the late morning sun shimmered on the surface like glass. Sarah had grown up in Zambia, her life deeply tied to this river. As a child, she watched her father work as a ranger, teaching tourists about the balance between beauty and danger that lived in these waters. Now, years later, she followed the same path, leading small groups of travelers eager to see the wild up close. Calm and confident, Sarah knew the Zambezi's moods better than most. Or so she thought that day. The group with her included 4 tourists, each wearing bright orange vests, cameras hanging around their necks. Their canoes drifted in a lazy line downstream, paddles cutting soft ripples across the water. The morning felt safe, almost too still. Birds perched along the banks and the distant sound of hippos echoed faintly through the air. Sarah steered from the front, scanning the water for signs of danger. She had done this route dozens of times. Nothing about it felt unusual. Yet beneath that quiet surface, danger stirred unseen. A large Nile crocodile lay hidden in the shallows, half buried in mud, its yellow eyes locked on the moving shadows above. Patient and still it watched, its rough scales blending perfectly with the murky riverbed. The crocodile had likely been there for hours, waiting for the right moment. As the canoes glided past, the vibration of the paddles drew its focus closer to Sarah's boat. The strike came without warning. A violent splash shattered the stillness, sending waves rolling through the air. The crocodile surged upward, its jaws clamping down on the edge of the canoe with bone-snapping force. The wooden hull cracked, flipping sideways as water rushed in. Sarah was thrown headfirst into the river, her paddle spinning away. Tourists screamed as their canoe tipped too, the calm morning now a whirl of panic and foam. Underwater, Sarah's world turned into chaos. Mud, bubbles, and flashes of sunlight blurred together. The creature's massive tail thrashed near her legs, stirring a storm of silt that made it impossible to see. She kicked wildly, breaking the surface just as the crocodile lunged again, its teeth snapping only inches from her arm. From the nearby bank, a ranger spotted the commotion and fired a warning shot into the air. The echo boomed across the river, but the crocodile held its ground for several tense seconds, circling the overturned boats like a dark shadow of power. Tourists struck the water with paddles, shouting and splashing in desperation. Finally, after one last tail sweep that rocked the wrecked canoe, the predator slipped back beneath the surface, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Sarah gasped for breath, clutching the side of the shattered canoe as her group floated nearby, shaken and drenched. The calm river that once promised peace had revealed its true side, wild, ancient, and untamed. Sarah's fingers clung tightly to the cracked canoe as the current carried her toward the reeds. The world around her still moved in chaos. Pieces of wood floated past, along with paddles and scattered bags. The frightened tourists gathered close, each holding on to whatever they could. Sarah's breath came in sharp bursts, her chest burning from exhaustion and fear. Her body shook, but she forced herself to stay calm. The water felt heavier now, every movement slower, every sound echoing deep inside her mind. The ranger on the bank shouted for them to stay together as he prepared the rescue boat. The engine roared to life, cutting through the echoes of the forest. Sarah tried to help the others move toward the shallows, pushing one of the tourists forward when he struggled. Her muscles ached, and a deep scratch along her thigh throbbed with pain. Still, she focused on reaching the edge, her eyes scanning the dark water, expecting another sudden strike. The river looked peaceful again, but every small ripple sent fear through the group. Beneath that glassy surface, they knew the crocodile could still be near. When the rescue boat reached them, strong hands pulled each person aboard one by one. Sarah was the last to climb in, her arms trembling as she gripped the side and hoisted herself up. Once she was safely inside, she collapsed against the metal bench, water dripping from her hair and vest. Her chest heaved, but she was alive. They sped back toward the river base, the engine leaving a long white trail behind. No one spoke. The tourists sat silent, eyes wide and faces pale. The sound of the rushing water mixed with the hum of the motor, filling the heavy silence with something that felt almost like relief. When they reached the dock, medics rushed to meet them. Sarah's leg was wrapped quickly, and the bleeding from the scrape was controlled with clean bandages. The tourists were checked for cuts and bruises, each one still trembling. Later that afternoon, as the sun lowered over the river, Sarah stood quietly by the bank, watching the current move past. The same calm that had felt welcoming in the morning now seemed distant and deceptive. A few broken pieces of her canoe floated near the edge, caught among the reeds. The sight reminded her of how close they had come to disaster. Word of the attack spread quickly through nearby towns. Local guides gathered to discuss what had happened, sharing stories of how often crocodiles waited in silence, blending with the river until the perfect moment came. Wildlife officials inspected the area and warned others to stay alert during the rainy months when visibility dropped and crocodiles hunted closer to the surface. For Sarah, the event became a turning point. She returned to work weeks later, careful but determined. The river was still her home, but she no longer saw it as calm or predictable. She taught new guides to look for subtle signs, a ripple too smooth, a shadow too still, things she once thought she knew but had learned to respect more deeply. The tourists who had survived with her often wrote to express their gratitude for her courage, saying that her strength had helped them stay calm when fear had nearly taken over. Sarah kept one of their letters folded inside her bag. a reminder of that day when the water's beauty had turned into terror and then back into peace. The Zambezi continued to flow endlessly, carrying both memory and warning through its endless rhythm, unchanged and unstoppable. In August 2019, Leah Nyerere, a 34-year-old ranger, began her early patrol along the edge of the Serengeti. She had spent nearly a decade guiding tourists, studying wildlife, and teaching visitors how to respect the delicate balance between predator and prey. Her calm nature and sharp instincts made her one of the most trusted rangers in the reserve. That morning, the sun burned through a thin veil of mist, casting gold light across tall grass and winding rivers. The air smelled of dust, rain, and warm earth, a day that promised quiet observation rather than danger. A tourist vehicle followed behind her as part of a routine inspection. Inside were 3 visitors from Nairobi, eager to see hippos and birds along the riverbanks. The driver, an experienced local, maneuvered slowly through narrow paths lined with reeds and mud. Leah walked alongside at times, taking notes and pointing out animal tracks. Everything seemed still except for the buzzing insects and the low calls of distant herons. When the vehicle reached a shallow bend in the river, the engine sputtered and stalled. The driver called for a short pause while Leah stepped forward to check the area. The shallow water reflected the sky, calm and glassy, broken only by drifting leaves. It looked harmless, a quiet sunlit stretch of brown-green water. She leaned forward slightly over the side of the Jeep to pick up a pair of binoculars that had fallen near the edge. Her gloved hand brushed the mud. Without warning, the surface of the water erupted. A massive Nile crocodile lunged upward, jaws wide, its body twisting with explosive speed. Mud and spray flew in every direction as its teeth clamped onto her boot, crushing the leather and dragging her toward the river. The weight was sudden, terrifying, and unstoppable. She lost her balance, falling forward as her hands scraped against the side of the Jeep. The animal's tail thrashed violently, slapping the surface with thunderous force. Her colleagues reacted instantly. One slammed the door, creating a loud crash, while another grabbed a wooden pole from the vehicle and struck the water. The sound echoed through the valley. The crocodile twisted, pulling harder, the pressure on Leah's leg unbearable. For a moment, her body was halfway over the edge, inches from being pulled under. The force of the predator was unlike anything she had felt, a living storm of muscle and instinct. Suddenly, the creature released its grip. The water churned once more, then stilled as the crocodile sank back into the depths, leaving only ripples behind. Leah collapsed backward onto the dry ground, trembling, her leg bruised and punctured. The quiet returned, broken only by her ragged breathing and the distant rustle of wind in the grass. The attack had lasted only seconds, yet it felt endless. A brutal reminder of how even calm riverbanks in the wild could hide deadly precision beneath their silence. Leah lay on the hard ground, her hands shaking as the sound of rushing water faded. Her breathing came in sharp bursts, her vision blurred from the shock. The mud around her leg was streaked with blood and torn fabric, though the bite had not broken the bone. The other rangers formed a barrier between her and the river, scanning the murky surface for movement. Nothing stirred. The great reptile had disappeared as quickly as it had struck, leaving the air heavy with fear. The tourists inside the vehicle sat frozen, their faces pale. The earlier excitement had vanished, replaced by quiet horror. The driver turned off the ignition completely, his eyes fixed on the calm river that had turned violent moments before. The water looked ordinary again, still and shallow, as if nothing had happened. Yet everyone knew what hid beneath, a silent hunter waiting for the next careless step. 2 rangers lifted Leah gently and helped her back into the Jeep. The pain pulsed through her leg, but she refused to cry. Her trousers were soaked, the torn boot still dripping from where the crocodile's teeth had pierced it. The team wrapped a strip of fabric tightly around her calf to slow the bleeding. Each throb reminded her of the raw strength that had almost dragged her into the depths. The driver started the vehicle again, this time keeping a careful distance from the riverbank. As the Jeep rolled forward, Leah looked out at the endless landscape. The tall reeds, the cracked mud, the faint ripples glinting under the afternoon light. The savanna stretched wide and peaceful, yet she now saw danger in every patch of still water. It was a lesson that could never be forgotten. Back at the camp, medical staff cleaned her wounds and applied fresh bandages. The punctures were deep, but she had escaped with her life. News of the attack spread quickly among the rangers and visitors. Some spoke in disbelief, others in quiet respect for how quickly the wild could turn against a human. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the acacia trees, Leah sat by the fire with her leg elevated. The sound of insects filled the air, and the scent of smoke mixed with the cool wind. Every few minutes she replayed the moment in her mind. The stillness before the strike, the sudden weight, the crushing force. It was not rage or hatred she felt toward the animal, but awe. The crocodile had not attacked out of malice. It had simply acted on instinct, hidden beneath calm water, patient and precise. Days later, she returned to the same stretch of river, not as a challenge but as closure. Her steps were slower, her gaze sharper. The river was quiet again, reflecting the sky without a ripple. She noted the tracks near the mud and marked the area as a restricted zone for tourist vehicles. Safety warnings were reinforced, and barriers were added along similar sections of the park. Though her leg would take weeks to heal, Leah resumed her duties with new caution and deeper respect. She knew that the Serengeti demanded attention in every breath and every step. What had nearly taken her life had also strengthened her resolve to protect both people and the animals that ruled this vast, untamed land.